Great, thanks, Claire. I wanted to first say that this is my first online story listening lesson, and using a tiny whiteboard. I usually use a large chalkboard in my classrooms. So I'm going to be doing or demonstrating a beginner level story listening story, because we had some comments last week on the story we heard, The Ungrateful Son, how it's more of an intermediate level, and how can you bring in story listening to your classroom for lower level learners. So I'm going to be adding some commentary while I deliver the story to just give you an idea of how I use story listening for beginning level language learners here in Taiwan. Claire mentioned I do teach middle school, but their language level is not grade level when they come into middle school. Many of them still have difficulty recognizing capital letters in the English language. So just because their age is 12 or 13 doesn't necessarily mean that their English level is at even approaching intermediate. So I'll get started with the story. And this story was recommended to me by Catherine, and it's also located on the Great Story Reading Project if you're interested. Here's my prompter, and this is our story name. The story name today is called The Talkative Tortoise. The Talkative Tortoise. Now, my student's L1 here in Taiwan is Mandarin Chinese, so I will be using some Mandarin Chinese where I think it's applicable for our comprehension aiding supplementation. So first, let's go through the title. The Talkative Tortoise. Talkative. Talkative means that you really like to talk. You really like to talk. Tortoise. Tortoise is an animal that looks like this. Has its head, 4 legs, a tail, little eye. It's a turtle. Tortoise is a turtle. It's a big turtle. Tortoise is a big turtle. So it does a 大的误会, a big turtle. So it's the talkative tortoise, a turtle who really likes to talk. So this story would come early on, maybe story number 3 or 4 that I would deliver with my classes at the beginning of the year. So every story we start the same. A long time ago. In Chinese, it's 很久以前 or 很久以前. So I'd start that a long time ago. A long time ago, there were 3 friends. And the 3 friends, they lived by a river. They lived by a river in India. This is a 国家. This is a country called Indu in Chinese, India. The 3 friends, 2 of the friends, they were geese. 2 of the friends were geese. They have an orange beak. So we have 2 geese. 2 geese. We have only 1. We call this a goose. A goose is not a duck. Not a duck. Kind of like a big duck. A goose, this is a goose. So 2 of the friends, they were geese. We have 2 geese. And the 3rd friend was a tortoise. A tortoise. So the 3 friends lived by a river in India. But in India at that time, there was a problem. And the problem was a drought. A drought had come to India. A drought means there was no water. No water. So the animals that lived by the river, Put in some more animals. The animals that lived by the river, they started to die. They started to die. In Chinese culture, when you do this, it means to die. The animals, they started to die of thirst. Thirst means if you are thirsty, you want to drink something, but there's no water. Chinese culture as well, this means to not have. So no water. So there's no water to drink, you are thirsty, and then you die. You die of thirst. So the friends get together to talk. What can we do? The geese say we should look. We should look for water. So the three friends, they go and they look. First, they go to look in a lake. There's a pool in a lake. But there's no water in the lake. So next, they go to a pond. Pond is like a small, just a small lake. There's no water in the pond. So the three friends, they decide. Decide, just a 决定, to decide. They decide to go far away to look for a water in a different place. 不一样的地方, different place. Now this is no problem for the geese. It is no problem for the geese because the geese, they can fly. They can fly to look for water. But this is a problem for the turtle, the tortoise. The tortoise will have to walk. And the tortoise is very slow. He is very slow. So if he has to walk, he will probably die of thirst. Die of thirst. So the tortoise has an idea. He says to his friends, let's find a stick. A stick. A stick, just a bang, a stick. Let's find a strong stick. And we can have one goose put its mouth, its beak, on one side. And we can have one goose on the other side. And in the middle, I, the tortoise, will use my teeth to hold the stick in my mouth. And in this way, we can fly together to look for water. The geese, they say to the tortoise, they say, wow, this is a very good idea. But they say to the tortoise, be careful. Be careful. Just 小心, be careful. Because you are talkative. You really like to talk. And if we are flying together and you talk, you will surely, just an 一定, surely, you will surely fall and die. Surely fall and die. The tortoise says to his friends, don't worry. When we are flying, I will not talk. So the geese say to the tortoise, okay, let's go. Just走吧, let's go. This is a disadvantage of having a smaller board, is you can't continue with the story. You can't have everything continue on and keep it that students can refer back to. So in this case, I'm going to have to erase to finish the story, which is something that we generally don't like to do in the practice of story listening. So this is, we're going to get into the pros and cons of online story listening versus classroom recordings. So let's go to the second half. The three friends, they find a stick. We have one goose here, one goose here, and in the middle we have our tortoise. So the geese and the tortoise and the stick, and they start to fly. They fly, wow, they fly very high in the sky. Very high. They are flying over mountains. They're flying over mountains. They are flying over some trees. We have some trees in our forest. The students already know this word. It comes up very frequently. Sending is forest in Chinese. So they are flying over mountains, over forests. Everything is okay. But then they get to a village. A village is small. We think of a city. A city is big. A city is big, very big. A city is big. A town is just in the middle. A town is just medium in the middle. But a village is very, very small. Very small. So they are flying. The three friends are flying over the village. They get to the village. In the village, there are people that live in the village. The people, they come to look at this very strange sight. Strange is a 奇怪的, very strange. So they point, they look, and they say, wow, look, there is a flying tortoise in the sky. In the village, there are some children. Here are our children. The children look and they think, wow, this is very, very cool. So the children, they start to cheer. Yay! They are cheering. They are cheering for the tortoise. Start to cheer. They are cheering. Yay! Go turtle! Go tortoise! The tortoise, he looks down at the children. And the tortoise wants to know. He is curious. He is curious. This is 好奇. He's very curious. He wants to know. He wants to know why. Why are they cheering? So, the tortoise, he has a question for his friends, the geese. He wants to know. So the tortoise opens his mouth to ask the question. And when he opens his mouth, the tortoise, he falls and dies. The end. So you can see there are some advantages to having a board at your home that you can record stories for possibly online tutoring, or in this strange time of ours, this coronavirus year, to share lessons. But there are some disadvantages. I'm not able to gauge my students' interest in the story or even their comprehension of what's going on if I can't see them directly in a classroom. And as you saw today, I had to erase half the story. So all of those images, all of those words, they're now gone from the frame. And a student would have to rewind to go back if they wanted to watch the story again. So I wanted to provide a little commentary on this story. This story, I do have a prompter ready if you are interested in telling the story. And there are also other story listening instructors who have done this story and have recordings of it as well in different languages that you can use for your reference. And this story has always been a big hit with students that I've used it with. So I hope you enjoyed the story. And if you have any questions, please make sure to include them in the box, and I will attach my YouTube channel so you can see how this worked with a classroom. So thanks, Claire.
Is that there? Okay, good. Oh, excellent. Okay, thank you for that. Okay, so I'll crack on. So these are the 3 studies. The first was done by Dr. Mason and Dr. Crash. Now, the key issue that the studies deal with, the key methodological issue, is the debate over the direct instruction of vocabulary versus incidental vocabulary acquisition. Now, direct vocabulary instruction refers to traditional vocabulary teaching, such as the use of fill-in-the-blank worksheets, the conscious learning of word lists, and having learners use some pre-decided words in a conversation or dialogue. Now, since the words have been decided in advance and they are presented in isolation from a communicative context, the teacher's goal is for the students to focus on form and to memorize the form and the meaning of these words. In contrast, incidental vocabulary acquisition refers to words being naturally picked up whilst the learner is focused on something else, such as engaging in conversation, reading a book, or listening to a story. Now, those of us who practice story listening would argue that incidental vocabulary acquisition is far more powerful and enduring. This is what is predicted by Dr. Krashen's comprehension hypothesis. It has been claimed, however, that combining both approaches is more effective than incidental acquisition alone. Cody made this claim in 1997, and this prompted Dr. Mason and Dr. Krashen to conduct their groundbreaking study. Now, please note that in our studies, it was not possible to compare pure incidental acquisition with form-focused learning. In our experiments, we compared a greater to a lesser focus on form, a more kind of incidental kind of acquisition with a more direct form of vocabulary teaching. A related pedagogical issue, especially for those of us who practice story listening, is this: what should we do after we have finished telling the story in class? This is a very important issue. Teachers who are considering trying story listening or who are new to story listening may think about falling back on traditional teaching methods and to try to reinforce vocabulary learning with worksheets and handouts, for example. Now, the 3 studies I'm going to present to you have very interesting findings related to this point. So the research question, which was common to all the 3 studies, was this. We compared story listening only with supplementing story listening with traditional activities, as I've said. Okay, next I will explain a little bit about the method, the way that the research was conducted. The studies were quasi-experimental, which means that existing classes received different types of instruction, and the effects were measured and compared. There were 2 different groups of subjects, a story-only group and a story plus study group. This was the same in all three studies. Next, I'll talk about the subjects. All the subjects were Japanese college students, 18 to 22, I think, and had studied English for at least 6 years before entering the college. You can see the number of subjects in each study. In my replications, the numbers were unfortunately rather low, but this was the data I could obtain, and in the future I aim to do more replications with a larger number of subjects. Okay, next. I want to describe to you the different kinds of treatments or types of instruction that the two groups received. Now, subjects in the story-only group first took a pre-test on 20 or 30 words. They had to write the L1 translation next to the English word. Now, all these words, these test words, occurred in the instructor story to the pre-test in a similar way to the way that you just saw. The instructor used comprehension aid to make the story comprehensible. Pictures on the board, and we provided quick L1 translation. Now, after listening to the story, which took 15 or 25 minutes, the subjects had an immediate post-test to find out how many words they had learned through listening to the story. And then the story-only group did nothing else after this to review the words or to study these test words. Nothing else was done with the words until they were given a surprise delayed post-test 4 or 5 weeks later. So that's the story-only group. How about the story plus study group? The same procedure was carried out at the beginning. After the immediate post-test, subjects were engaged in more supplementary form-focused vocabulary activities. So the aim of these activities was for the subjects to consciously learn the test words. There was some variation in the exact supplementary activities among the three studies, but I think importantly, there was a mixture of input and output-based activities. I'll tell you the details of them next. Now, in the study, the instructor asked comprehension questions to elicit the test words, the target words, and asked questions which included the target words. Also, after the immediate post-test, the subjects read a written version of the story, and also importantly, the teacher and the students checked the immediate post-test. The subjects got the correct answers the subjects in the story-only group did not get. Also, as an output activity, subjects retold the story. When the story, they just looked at the test words that were written on the board. Now, these supplementary activities took a total of about 40 or 45 minutes of class time. After they were finished, the subjects took a second immediate post-test to measure how many words they had learned from doing these supplementary vocabulary activities. Now, in my replication studies, both of them, I also asked comprehension questions and I checked the answers with the subjects. But after that, I had the subjects use flashcards. Flashcards have been recommended by people such as Paul Nation, a well-known vocabulary researcher. So there was a flashcard with the English word, the target word on one side, and a picture or an L1 translation on the other. And in pairs, subjects would take one of the cards and they would quiz each other. And also, as an output activity, they would create sentences using the word on the card that they had chosen. So again, there was the input and output activities. Okay, let's move on and look at the results of these interesting studies. Now, this is a graph of the data from the original study conducted by Dr. Sanand. You see the two curves. The blue one represents the story plus study group. Now, the curve starts in the bottom left with the means of the scores. The maximum score was 20, so the mean was just 4. The curves then increase to the first post-test value. This was done immediately after telling the story. And thereafter, the curves, the blue curve continues to rise. This is because the story plus study group took another post-test after doing all the supplementary activities. So you can see that doing the supplementary activities did have a short-term effect, and the mean score rose to 19.7. After that, you see that the average scores on the delayed post-test were lower than the scores on the immediate post-test. This means that the subjects forgot some of the test words after the 4 or 5 week interval. 4 or 5 weeks later, they have forgotten some of the words. This is exactly what we would expect. Now, from looking at the graph, it may appear that the story plus study group outperformed the story only group because they did much better on the delayed post-test. They knew more words 4 or 5 weeks later. However, remember that the story only group spent just 15 minutes listening to a story, whereas the story plus study group spent an extra 40 or 45 minutes on supplementary activities. So comparing the mean scores is not a fair comparison. What we are really interested in is the efficiency of instruction, how many words the subjects could acquire per minute of instruction. I will come back to this in a moment. Before that, I'll show you the graphs to my two replication studies. In my first replication study, the graphs look very similar to those in the original study, but the gap between the two groups on the delayed post-test was smaller. Now to the second replication. In this study, the story-only group actually outperformed the story plus study group on the delayed post-test, which was a surprise. So the story plus study group did well on the immediate post-test, the high point of 25.43 out of a maximum of 30 points. So they did well immediately after doing the supplementary activities, but this gain was lost. This gain disappeared 5 weeks later. So let's move on and look at the result of the studies, the efficiency calculations. So we calculated how many words the subjects acquired per minute of study. This was done simply by dividing the number of words gained on the delayed post-test by the number of minutes of classroom study. Now, the calculations I'm going to show you didn't include time spent on testing. Now, you may argue that we should include the time spent on testing because, for example, the subjects may have been primed to focus on the test words by taking the pre-test. This is true, and we included calculations including time in our published studies, which you are welcome to look at. But I will tell you now that the different figures do not affect our findings. Okay. Now, these were the efficiency scores for all the gains on all the post-tests. What we are really interested in is the column on the right of the table, the figures for the delayed post-test. The delayed post-test is by far the most important test. Our job is to help our learners develop proficiency over the long term. So we are interested interested in how many new words learners could remember after 4 or 5 weeks. So let's look at the figures in the right-hand column in isolation next. Here they are. So you'll see that in the original story study group learned 0.16 words per minute of instruction, where the story-only group managed to learn 2.5 words per minute of instruction. So the treatment of the story-only group as listening to a story was far more effective. Now, the superiority of just listening to a story was also found in both my replications. You'll see the figure on the right in the story-only group column is higher than in the story plus study group. This means that in both my replications, just listening to a story was a more efficient way of acquiring vocabulary. So, my replications corroborated the findings of Dr. Mason and Dr. Krashen's original study. Now, in conclusion, the data we obtained is completely in accordance with what Dr. Krashen's comprehension hypothesis tells us we should expect. Conscious learning of vocabulary may lead to a short-term gain, but this diminishes over time. This kind of knowledge is fragile. So just listening to a story was a far more efficient way to acquire vocabulary and a more efficient way of using class time. The final conclusion, language learning, as we know, is a very, very slow process. So much input is required for acquisition to happen. So we need to maximize our learners' exposure to rich and compelling input. And of course, we believe that this rich, compelling input can be found in listening and guided self-selected reading. You may be surprised by just how low the efficiency scores were. They were between 0.18 words per minute and 2.5 words per minute. It's just the fact that language learning, language acquisition is a very, very slow process. Okay, now, I have one more thing to tell you. It's an addendum. I returned to the question earlier. What should teachers do after telling a story, after doing story listening in class? Now, since traditional form-focused vocabulary activities would seem to be inefficient, we would recommend ways to promote incidental acquisitions, such as reading or listening to more stories. Now, one concern that teachers new to story listening may have is that our learners may get tired of listening to stories, and the efficiency may diminish with the second story. So I decided to investigate this. Are there diminishing returns by telling a second story or not? So in another study I conducted at the same time as my second replication, I told 2 stories in a row. So this was basically a double version of the story-only group treatment. So we did pre-tests, an immediate post-test, and a delayed post-test 5 weeks later. Now, the words gained per minute for the first story that I told, which took 25 minutes, was 0.15, a little bit lower than in the other studies, but not by very much, 0.15. And then I told another story, which also lasted 25 minutes. And the second story, the efficiency figure was actually 0.22. So the subjects who listened to the second story gained more words by listening to the second story than by listening to the first. Telling the second story was a more efficient use of class time than telling the first story. This is a very positive result. Of course, this is just one small-scale study, but it is a positive, and I think it's definitely worth replicating, and I intend to do that. I think that is all I have time for today. I hope that I have persuaded you that there is good evidence that story listening is effective and efficient. Thank you very much for listening. Thank you.
Stephen, there was a question that was brought up. I know that you did address there at the end, but I wanted to find out if you wanted to talk to this user personally. She was asking if your activities were focused more, on direct instruction and form-focused activities, and if maybe you and Dr. Mason could weigh in. Are there activities, instead of just telling a second story, that have been found to be worthwhile? Like, I know initially Dr. Mason suggested students write a summary in their L1 following this story. Have you found any examples of activities that are as efficient and effective to follow a story instead of just moving on to story number 2?
Yes. As far as I know, we haven't found anything like that. So we're basing story listening on Dr. Question's theories, as Dr. Question's comprehension hypothesis. So that would tell us that position would come sufficiently from reading or listening. So, which strays theoretically be less efficient.
So all signs pointing to have time, tell another story, or provide, in some cases, time for independent reading. Because I know that's the ideal setting in the classroom, right? Is to allow time for stories. And
we do story listening really as a way. Of course, it's great input, it's rich input, but one of the main reasons we do story listening is to encourage the students to go and read more, so they can do that outside class. So they really need to listen and to read to compelling stories as much as possible.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.